Hello, everyone, and welcome to Waterfowl Carving Live with Pat Godden. We're going to start in a couple minutes, so just sit tight, and we'll be with you in a minute. We're just at 2 o'clock. I'm going to give everyone a minute or two more before we officially start. If we have any late people tuning in. Well, I think we'll go ahead and start rolling. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Mark Allison. I'm the editor of Wildfowl Carving magazine. And we're happy to be presenting this webinar about a new book we're releasing to our book club members, Pat Godin Waterfowl Carving. And we have Pat Godden joining us today to discuss the book. Wanted to mention a couple offers we're offering. Those of you who've registered and are joining us, we are having a limited time subscription offer. You can see on the screen, great discount there. If you want to subscribe to the magazine, comes out 4 times a year. And you can log on wildfowlcarving.com, virtual 23, and take advantage of that discount. And if you would like to join the Wildfowl Carving Book Club, we also are offering a discount on the current offering, which is Pat Godin Waterfowl Carving, just released, coming soon to book club members who are already in the club. Certainly invite you to join and get a discount on Pat Godden's book, which is our first offering, or our latest offering. And then beyond that, as we publish books, we will let you know, and you can decide whether you want to buy them or not. All the book club members get first crack at their release, and we offer a discount. So you can, again, log on wildfowlcarving.com, new book, to take advantage of that offer. Just something we wanted to thank everyone for joining us. So today we're here, and there's the cover of Pat's book. I have a copy here. Pat Godin Waterfowl Carving, just released. Beautiful hardcover book, 160 pages, 8.5 by 11, coffee table book filled with photos. And Pat Godin is here with us today to discuss the book. Although he doesn't really need an introduction, I will give him a short introduction. Pat Godin has accumulated 17 world titles, with wins in 4 of the 5 world categories of the World Championships. And in 2015, he was honored as a Ward Museum Living Legend. Before beginning his bird carving career, he was a biologist assistant with the Canadian Wildlife Service and later a research assistant at the Delta Waterfowl Research Station, which he discusses in the book. He's a popular carving instructor and he's developed numerous resources for carvers, including his popular championship waterfowl pattern book series. So welcome, Pat. I'm so happy you could join us. We're going to discuss the book briefly, talk about what's in it, and then open things up for questions. So welcome, Pat. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just one little correction on your introduction.
Yeah.
I actually got my 18th World Championship title at the last show. Anyway,
since the book came out, I know.
Yeah.
And that was with the birds we have on the cover of the book. Is that correct?
No.
They won.
It was actually the World Shooting Rig category with my black ducks. Yeah. So this book, actually, the genesis of it started probably 15 years ago. Your predecessor, Tom Huntington, he had been bugging me for 10 years to do this book. And finally, the timing had to be right. I know there was work I wanted to do that I felt had to be in a book if I was going to do one. And finally, probably 5 years ago, I committed to do it. And so really the work on this started that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was of course, the writing part of it. And in this book, there's upwards of, I believe, 35,000 or more words. And, you helped me at one point there with some editing to make it readable. It probably wasn't horrible, but it certainly your help improved it. And then of course the photography. One little note in this book, probably I probably underestimating when I say 95% of the photography in this book is mine. Mm-hmm. There are some, you'll see some of the images that have photo credits on them. Those are images that I did not take, but pretty much everything, even the cover, I shot myself. So it was really a very hands-on thing for me. I set very high standards for my work, and I wanted this book to reflect that. Mm-hmm. So I wanted that when somebody picks up that book, I wanted them to feel the quality, not only of the work inside, but in the production of the book itself and the quality of the images. And I'm hoping that it's not only someone sitting down and looking at the pictures, because there's a lot of real significant writing there that I think will inspire people. Mm-hmm. And that, in the end, I think that's my objective. I want somebody to read this and go through this book, and at the end of it feel they learn, not only learn technical things, but also they achieve an insight of how I approach my work, and mm-hmm. The kind of the philosophy I have behind what I do. So I think that was my ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. And I guess until I hear some feedback, I'm not sure if I'm 100% successful, but and I know I'll go through that book and I'll probably at some point say, man, I wish I'd have done it this way or that way, but you just got to do it and do it the best you can at the time. And when I saw samples of the book, finally, I have to say, I guess I impressed myself.
So do you do that with your carvings? You said you're going to look at the book probably and go and say, oh man, I wish I would have done that differently. Curious, do you do that with your work?
Well,
your art?
Not that much, because there's so much pre-planning, and I've done it for so long that I really know where I'm going with it. And mm-hmm. With a book, so like this, it's almost like first time thing for me.
Yeah.
Put a book like this together. So, to anticipate things, it was a little more difficult. And one thing I done in the book, and when I got it, I pretty much read the whole thing through when I got the first copy of it, and maybe I talked a little bit too much about this or that. And one thing I really, if you go through it and read it, you'll see I talk a lot about the preparation I do before I start a carving, and particularly modeling,
Mhm.
which to me I think is one of the keys to the success of a lot of my carvings. So even before I start working in the wood, I have a really good vision of where I'm going with it, and it has to be primarily the modeling part of it that really is helpful, tremendously helpful, really.
Mhm.
Now, there are some things I don't model.
Okay.
Simpler decoys, I just have a good feel for what the bird looks like, and I'll do a two-dimensional pattern, and then I can go from there and then work my way through it and be successful with it. Some of the
Mhm.
more complex things, though, um, I wood can be so unforgiving. I learned a long time ago that if you have a clear idea where you're going with it, you can be so much more successful.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that really is the modeling part of it, and that's a whole different skill that you have to learn. And I talked about in the book too about how what happens when you model a bird. And my theory is that most of the real creative stuff happens in the modeling stage, because you have you can change things, you can move things around. You can develop the design gradually without worrying about whether you've taken too much wood off
Mhm.
here or there.
Mhm. We
So
have a,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, we have a question here, and feel free, those who are listening, to use the chat for questions. Some of those we will, uh, uh, offer to Pat now, and then others we will wait till the end of this thing. But somebody asked, do you model your shooting rigs?
Uh, well, not really, but you did that one article in the
Mm-hmm.
magazine. It was a little excerpt from the book.
Mm-hmm.
In that particular case, I actually did model them, but it was a totally different way. I modeled them by cutting out side profiles and just in black,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a number of each of the birds in different, you might say, different profiles. And now
Mm-hmm.
you could put them together, and I could kind of get a better vision of what they would look like together. So that certainly is, in a sense, modeling for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, there's all kinds of ways to model things, and I use clay sometimes. I use other materials sometimes, and I've even carved a real quick version of the carving in wood, real fast, just to get a picture of in my mind of what the arrangement of the birds is or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the, the clay is certainly a key to. And it was interesting. I was looking at something else. It was a show on TV where somebody was doing some kind of a sculpture of something, and they before they did it, they did a clay model of it. And I thought, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's the same thing I do with my birds. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not exclusive to bird carvers that should approach the work in that way.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at some of the images. And again, I wanted to provide a sample and we can discuss these, but the book is filled with photos. Although it's not a how-to book, it's also of great instructional value, in that it shows so many photos, historical, as you can see here. So it's interesting. This photo, I think, tell us about the photo of you
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
as a young buck.
yeah, yeah. I was a rookie back in those days. That was 1976. And I had just a real quick history. 74, I had a carving at the World Show, but I didn't attend. A friend of mine, Paul, brought the carving there. It ended up, it was entered in the amateur class. They had novice, amateur, and professional. They changed that to intermediate and open later. It ended up winning best of show in the amateur class, which I think at that time, it's one of the first competitive decoys I ever made. It was pretty good. Then the next year I came and I competed at the professional level with some single decoys. And then the next year, 76, I entered the world pairs and ended up winning. And that's a picture of me actually taken by Paul Burdett. I would have been 76, I would have been 23 years old there. So anyway, that was, I was competing against a lot of people that now I can look back and say they were real mentors to me. And they were in a lot of ways, they were my idols. And I competed against these people, and it was, to me, I just think to this day, just amazing. I was able to be competitive with them and ended up beating them in the end. But so anyway, that's the beginning of my history at the World Championship. And I only missed 1 year, in 1979. I was finishing my master's degree up that year, and I was finishing my research, my thesis for my master's degree. I hadn't carved anything. So in 79, 1980, I made a decision when I graduated with my master's degree to start carving birds full time. So 1980 was the first year that I actually went true professional carver. So that's and I've only missed that 1 year going to the World Championship. Of course, we had the pandemic years, which we didn't have it. But so it's been an incredible experience. That show has had such a great impact on my life. We literally wheeled our kids through that same building in Ocean City when they were babies. And and this year my grandson was there 3 weeks old, so they were bringing him through there as a baby. So it's needless to say, it's been a great great thing for me, that show and many others. That's the other thing about this book. I have a lot of little anecdotes and things about these competitions, and I've mentioned a lot of carvers in this book for various reasons in my discussions, and people that had influence on me. I seen Tom Christie was he's listening in, and he's actually has a picture of him in the book with him and I judging. So and a few other mentions in different areas. So Tom, if you can hear me there, you'll find it interesting going through the book. And the other thing I wanted to do is to make, I didn't want to have real technical writing that people didn't understand. I wanted to make it easy for people to read and hopefully a little bit entertaining as well. And I'm hoping there's knowledge to be gained there. Especially not necessarily the technical things, because like you say, it's not really a technical book, but the way I approach my work I think can be maybe a lesson for a lot of people on how to approach their work. And I hope this inspires people to maybe think a little differently about how they do things. And the other thing is, like, I talk about things, how I do things.
Yeah.
But there are many ways to do things. And I think I mentioned in the book somewhere that it's the end result that counts. It's not necessarily really how you get there. It's the end result that counts. And I don't want to tell people, oh, you have to do it this way. You
Right,
have to use acrylic paints. And
right.
I tremendously admire the people that use oil paints because I think they do some incredible work. I use acrylics, but there's so many different ways to do make these birds.
Let's look at the next shot. That's another historical
Oh,
photo. And I want to tell
yeah,
everybody that all these photos are from the book too. So the book is
yes,
a combination of lots of close-ups of the projects,
yeah.
as well as some of these historical photos. So you talked about research and your training as a researcher and in the field and how that is so important to your work. And that kind
That's
of connects with what's going on here.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, I always say that observing birds and studying birds in the wild is undoubtedly the absolute best thing you can do.
Mhm,
Because there's things you see in the way, the mannerisms of the bird. There's certain characteristics of the bird when they float on the water, how they hold their tail, and all that stuff.
mhm,
So that's tremendously important. Here in this photograph, if some of you have been around for a while, you would recognize Kurt Fobb from Louisiana. He had quite an extensive aviary of live birds, and I was in this case in this photo here. I'm taking measurements from a live bird. You can't see the bird very well, but he's holding the bird, and I'm taking measurements from. I probably maybe taking measurements of the maybe the location of the eye relative to the bill or something like that.
mhm.
And I was gathering this information. I was recording all this stuff, writing it down. This was in preparation for probably my first pattern book, which came out in 1986. No, yeah, 1986. That was the marsh duck pattern book, and I was gathering the information to put that book together and ensure the accuracy of the patterns. And so I did take measurements from literally I took measurements from live birds in a lot of
Mhm,
cases.
mhm.
And I know people tell me that so often they rely on those patterns at least as a starting point with some of the work they're doing. And that's not material that gets old. It's just as valid today as it was back in 1986.
Mhm. Let's look at the next image. That's a close-up of
Yes.
the bird on the cover that you also, and it was interesting that that first shot was you and your first competition, and then a
Yes.
pair that you had entered in the most recent ward
Yeah.
championship. So,
This was 2023, and that this bird was actually ready to compete at the 2020 show when they canceled it. It
mhm,
was completed then. And then subsequent to that, I made the hen uh, as a mate for it. And this bird here in this picture, I always almost everything I do. I should say there are exceptions, but almost everything I do, I carve the body separate from the head. So
mhm,
it's basically a two piece carving. And that's I guess you might say in contrast to the work some of the Cajuns do, which they do some fabulous work. They sculpt it out of a single block of wood, which is to me amazes me sometimes. Um, but this bird here, if you look at the pictures, there's a whole bunch of pictures of this bird from different angles and
mhm,
the head as well in the book. Um, you'll see there's a tremendous amount of complexity, especially up in the scapular feathers. The bill is actually pushing those feathers up. So all of that was carved out of the block of wood, the original block of wood I used for the body. There's only one feather, and you can see it in his bill that I had to add. I just couldn't manage to get that one feather out. Those other white feathers under there are carved out of the block as well. Back in now, there's another feature in that book of the pintails I made. Very complex birds back in, I believe, it was made in the early '90s, I believe. And those birds were pintails. and real complex designs. Now, those birds there, I guess in contrast to what I'm doing now, I try to get as much as I can out of a single block of wood
Mhm.
today. And back in those days, there was a trend, even starting in, I know, 70s and 80s, where people were actually almost more building birds than carving birds. They would insert tremendous numbers of feathers on birds on their carving to create a dramatic effect. And
Mhm.
so I've back in like this in that early 90s there and into the 80s, a lot of times I would elect or make a choice to insert certain feathers to create a dramatic effect. In this case here, I create a dramatic effect without having to insert them, and I try to get as much as I can out of a block of wood. So this is a really good example of how I currently work. This bird was the best to show in the master's level
Mhm.
decorative decoys at the most recent world show, and the hen was actually second behind him. Um, but I thought that that drake and the hen would make a great cover shot. They're little bit different. They're not like the common mallards. And they've got a great color scheme.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, there they are. They got such a great color scheme. And it's a challenging little bird to make.
Mhm. And I'll note too that this is an example of how you show different angles of these award-winning birds. So it's kind of as if you were actually there and could look at it in all directions and from all angles and see everything that's going on, both the carving and the painting. Um, Almost as good as being there and looking at them live.
Yeah.
So let's look at the next image. And again, I will remind everyone, if you have questions, we will kind of collect those. You can use the Q&A chat box to answer questions, and we'll give them to Pat at the end. Speaking of inserts,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
another
This is a
example
yeah, yes.
from the book.
Now,
And
one thing, one thing I want to go back just a little bit.
yeah.
I've documented my work with photography for probably, I'm going to think, 35 years or more, way before digital photography. I've got folders full of 35 millimeter slides, and that material just came into unbelievably great use in this
Yeah.
book because
Mhm.
even though they're 35 millimeter slides, I got reasonably good scans out of them. And
Mhm.
this is a good case here. Now, this is a picture of the finished red-breast merganser with a technique I developed. This is a more recent bird, but I originally did the first merganser I did like this, using this technique in around 1983, I believe. And I basically, in my mind, had to figure out how to do it to create the effect I wanted to do it. So I've always trained my mind to think logically through
Mhm.
these technical processes. And so I thought my way through it, and then actually applied all the different things I was figured would work, and it actually worked really well.
Mhm.
So I thought, well, that turned out to be quite successful. In this particular case in the book, I believe I looked at it yesterday to count them. I think there's 9 photographs showing the process I used to create this effect to insert all those uh, pieces in there to create the crest on this bird.
Yeah,
So
let's
it's
look at the second next slide.
it's okay.
Yeah, there. The one
Okay,
over there.
there's a sample
Mhm.
one of the slides in the book that show one of the stages. There's a
Mhm.
whole bunch of them there to show you the progress as I work through to create the that effect with
Mhm.
the crest. Now, I also noted in the book that that technique works really, really well with a real loose, hairy crest. If
Mhm.
you're going to do like a wood duck or something like this, that technique really wouldn't work. It's
Mhm.
so when you've got a challenge of a in a particular bird, you have to kind of, I guess, from experience, and you have to kind of figure out, okay, what's the best way to solve this problem. And um, you hope, because there's a lot of times you have a lot of time commitment, you hope it works when you decide, oh yeah, this is the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
um, it's-
and that's interesting that the book you talk. I mean, there's so much problem solving that you're trying new techniques, don't know whether they'll work or not. And this is kind of a technique that I'm assuming you came up with yourself. I mean, you didn't learn all this from some other source.
no,
Um,
that's
but yeah,
absolutely true. Yeah,
yeah.
no, this is there are probably, like anything else, there are probably a number of ways to
Hmm.
achieve
Hmm.
this. But this is the way I figured it out, and you can see in that first photograph you showed, it was really quite effective
Hmm. Hmm.
um, for that style of a crest. Yeah, so that was um, you know there a lot of the other things in the book don't probably go into quite as much depth, but
Hmm. Hmm.
I purposely chose in a number of cases where I thought, well, people are going to be interested in seeing how I did this. So I went into a little bit more depth in showing it with photographs, and also in the discussion I have in the writing
Hmm.
on how I did certain things and why I did it. That's the other thing. Like when I'm teaching my students, when I have a number of seminars, I've got some of them coming up. I'll talk a little bit about here in a little while, but um, I'm I don't only not only want to show them how to do something, but I want them to understand why they're doing it,
Hmm.
and that to me is more valuable for them to understand why they're doing it, and then in some ways, it's easier for them to apply that knowledge, that technical knowledge, to something else because they
Hmm.
understand why they're doing it.
Hmm.
So that was another thing in the book there. I totally try to be quite thorough and explain why do certain things, why I
Hmm.
do it a certain way.
And as you say, there certainly are other ways that the same thing could be accomplished, or perhaps, you know, somebody comes up with a way that could improve on your technique. I mean, that's kind of the
Yep,
process that you talk about in the book.
that's right.
You build on what you know, and there really isn't a right or wrong. It's what works.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the end result that counts in the end,
Hmm.
and um, it's and in the competitions too, you see all these different approaches and styles, and
Hmm.
uh, you know, most of them are really, really good. And
Hmm.
you know that those carvers, they didn't do everything like I do it. They did it their own way, and we're successful with it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Let's look at the next image. Um, and and this kind of corresponds with the follow of the next one too. So these are just examples of some of the finished pieces, as well as how they were created. And we were fortunate, we meaning the publisher, that Pat, that you did document all this
Oh
uh,
yeah.
with photographs as you were working on, because you couldn't reverse engineer this. So
Yeah.
there's this one, and then the next one I think kind of is an example of
Yes.
a in process photo that we show in this book. So not a how-to book, but definitely incredible information for carvers
Yeah. Yeah.
here.
You
Um,
go back to the slide before there, and talk a little bit about these birds.
Hmm.
The one thing I had a discussion. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's in there, so you'll find it when you read it. I talked about when I build the character in a bird, I I don't want to avoid anthropomorphizing birds. In other words, trying to incorporate human character in the bird.
Hmm.
And this is an example here. You could say, well, the buffalo is, man, they're just such a cute little bird. Well, and I tried to get that because that's the character of that bird. Now, a bufflehead, I wouldn't make that bird look fierce and angry, like, because that's not the character of the bird.
Hmm.
You could do a fierce looking bird, but it'd have to be the right kind of bird.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to capture the character of the bird as I see it and I interpret it. I'm not trying to build a character that the real bird doesn't have. I'm really trying to capture the the character of that live bird, whatever the species is. This bird here too, and we'll when you go back to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about it. But this is also a good case, and I've got quite a good discussion in the book about texture and what decisions you make on what type of texture to put on a surface. Almost all of my decisions are based on the color scheme of the bird,
Hmm.
um, and the different regions of the bird. Um, in this case here, I chose to do real fine burning up on the dark areas on the back of the bird, and then on the dark areas on the iridescent areas on the talking about the drake, um, because that color scheme really works well with that real clean, fine burning. The side feathers, the white areas on the sides and the breast, I, I chose to do a smooth texture there. Now there's feather splits and feather sculpting there, but there's no texture. And I found from doing over the years, I've done so many smoothies. I've learned to paint really well on that smooth surface, and it's actually easier to paint on that smooth surface in some ways. So um, I think the effect you get, the whites look so much more pure and clean without having texture on them, and you can do some really, really nice painting on them. The hand itself, because they're all grays, that whole bird has texture everywhere on it. So I'm purposely choosing the texture in different regions of the bird based on the color scheme in those areas. So that's from, again, from experience in knowing what happens when you put a particular texture on the surface and then paint it, and you see the effect that you get. Maybe 15, 20 years ago I might have textured that whole white area, but now in my mind I think I get a much better effect by not texturing. And I always figure, everyone says, well, uh what texture should you put here or there, and I say I'm going to leave this smooth. Well, in my mind, smooth is a valid texture,
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
like a burn texture or a stone texture. It's a valid texture, so it's an option you have. And I'm always trying to create variety when I have the opportunity. I'm looking for places where I can create variety in texture, the color scheme. It makes the bird so much more interesting. And people look at it. Sometimes they don't know why it's interesting, but you've done all these little things on there that create all these interesting little things in the color scheme and texture, and it's just that should be your goal if you're carving a bird. Make it
Hmm.
interesting, and find a way to do that. If you go to the
But
next one, you'll see you can see that. Okay, you can see up on the back. I've got burning there, and all that side on this bird is basically done, ready to paint. So I really didn't do anything else on that. That was ready to paint right there. But you can see there is some feather structure. There's little subgroups, what I call subgroups, groups of 3 or 4 feathers. And those are the dominant shapes there. They're not the individual feathers. You can see individual feathers, but the dominant shapes are you might say, well, I call them subgroups of feathers. And that surface there is so nice to paint on when it's like that. And that Tupelo just sands so beautiful. That's what these birds are made of. You know, that foot, you can see the wood is a little different color on the end of it. That the end part of the foot is carved out of dogwood, which is very, very hard, resilient wood. You can thin it down, and it's really, really strong. And then part of the leg is actually carved out of the block of wood for the body. You can see where that transition is, and it helped me get a nice transition. Those little feathers overlapping over top of the leg, I could get that real nice and clean. Your other option would be, you know, if you did that whole foot out of the carved dogwood, you'd have to use filler in some places, and I try to avoid that as much as I can. So it's and of course I could figure all this out because I had a real nice model for this bird. I could figure out, you know, where the position of the leg, where I wanted to incorporate those feathers overlapping the surface of the leg, and that the model just guided me along so I could get it right.
We do have some questions coming in, and I think I'll stop and ask them because they are kind of technique related to things you're watching. If I don't get your question now, if we have time, we'll be able to answer it at the end of the presentation. How much airbrushing do you do? That question has come up a couple times. Or do you more heavily rely on brushes?
Well, I regard the airbrush as just another tool with everything else that I have. I've got probably 4 different methods of blending paints that I use. When I'm doing my seminars, I'm talking about when I'm teaching, I'm talking about all these different methods of paint, paint blending. And the airbrush is one thing. There's certain things where the airbrush certainly has an advantage. I use a lot of wet blending techniques. I'm using fan blenders, and I've got little blending brushes. Sometimes you get little using that method. It looks different. Sometimes airbrushing is too perfect. If you're using another method and you're actually dragging colors together, it's a more natural looking type of paint color scheme when you're finished with it. So probably all the birds I do, I've probably got airbrushing somewhere, but I don't. In the end, I don't want people to look at it and say, "Oh, it's all airbrushed." Well, it's the blending might be beautiful and perfect, but there's a lot of areas that if you look close, it's not airbrush. It's just my other methods of painting. This is one thing about this bird here. I've got the design is for this. Just while we got this on the screen, this seminar I'm doing here in the Krausman studio, we're actually doing a very similar model as this with the foot out with the buffalo head drake. That's coming up later in the year. So that should be an exciting, challenging project for the students.
Couple questions about modeling here. What type of clay do you use?
I remember way back when I first started modeling, I used an oil-based clay, Roma plastilina. You can buy that in different consistencies. Some is real soft, some of it's more firm. A lot of the bronze sculptors use oil-based clay to make their models, and then they cast them in bronze. But back, it was quite a long time ago, really long time ago. talking with Larry Barth, and he was using Sculpey,
Mhm.
the original Sculpey, which is white. They have various other types of Sculpey products, but the white Sculpey is basically what I use. And one of the advantages of that, it works very much like the oil-based clay, but when you're finished with it, and I do this with all of them, you can put them in an oven at maybe 200 degrees for maybe half an hour, and it actually hardens the clay. Basically,
Mhm.
it's permanently hardened. If you want to, you can even paint it. I've done that with a few of my models. I've actually taken and painted them after they were, you might say, cured in the oven. But once you do that, you're not going to move the clay around anymore. So you want to kind of be where you want to be
Yeah.
before you do that. But they'll hold up a little better too over time. Those models are not made to last a long time. I've got a whole shelf full of old models, and some of them just sitting there, they start to deteriorate.
Are they
You've
full
got to
size?
Oh yeah, I do everything full size. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and of course I do my miniatures. I do miniature models for my miniature carvings, and
Mhm.
they're at the scale that whatever I'm working with.
Okay.
And that kind of makes sense because I always visualize a model as analogous to you might say a quick pencil sketch an artist might do before he does a painting
Mhm.
on a two-dimensional surface. So it serves as a guide, as a three-dimensional guide, and you want to be able to take measurements. Say, for example, like where this foot is on this buffalo head. I want to be able to measure from where that foot is coming out of the body to the end of the tail. I want to get the proportions correct. So if you have the model and you've done everything accurately on it, one thing about modeling, I don't want to talk about it too much, but there's a lot of it in the book where I've discussed this. The you Modeling forces you to research the bird, because to do a good model, you have to know the bird and to get everything accurate. So it forces you to study the bird, and all that knowledge that you're gaining during the modeling stage is all knowledge you're going to use when you're carving the bird.
Mhm.
So it's you're not only spending the time to make the model, but you're learning a lot about the bird as you're doing it. So that it's a win-win situation to make these models if you're inclined to do that.
Mhm. Why don't we look at the next couple images? And um, you mentioned there was an article in the magazine
Yes.
uh, on this rig, and that's included.
Yeah.
And I think the next image shows kind of again, kind of a little bit of the step by step, which is interesting for that,
Yes.
how that bill was
Yeah.
created.
Yeah. And the one thing about the shooting rigs, they're you know they want them to be fairly durable. The whole concept originated from uh, a gunning style decoy, and it
Hmm.
certainly evolved beyond that. But they still have those criteria where you don't want to have thin tails, and you don't want to have your wingtips, your primaries cut real thin so that they're fragile. In this case, when I wanted to open the bill in this bird, um, I I knew if I made it out of Tupelo, it would be pretty delicate. And so I thought, well, I'll insert a piece of a dogwood in there to carve the bill out of. And that dogwood it's not unbreakable, but it's really, really strong. So anyway, once I got that inserted, and just carve it like I would my regular process of going through and carving the head, and ended up with what I think was quite a good, really nice durable bill on that bird. I've done that in a number of cases, especially my mergansers, where I've done that because they got such a thin bill. and it's an advantage to, excuse me, to insert that on a dogwood.
Mhm. Why don't we, the next slide shows, I think, just the painting and texturing you had mentioned.
Yes. Well, the one thing in the book I wanted to show with this, I did a comparative thing. This is hand brush vermiculation. I had another image that goes with this that shows combed vermiculation. So I wanted to show the contrast in the technique.
Mhm.
And with hand brush vermiculation, you can be a little bit more precise and accurate with it. But the combing, if you learn to comb well, you can create some really incredibly realistic versions of the vermiculation. And that was the one reason I wanted to show this slide as a comparative thing to the comb vermiculation on the other image.
Yeah, the next shot shows, well, those are
Yeah,
some of the tools you created
yeah,
to get the effect you want.
yeah. Right. So the vermiculation on a Gadwall drake is really coarse in some areas, especially the transition from the breast into the vermiculation on the sides. It gets a little finer as you go further the posterior end of the side feathers.
Mhm.
But I just took these. These are actually from a fishing tackle box. They have all little plastic dividers. Excuse me on that. And I just cut those pieces of plastic, and then of course you have to determine um, the tines on the comb are actually going to create the space, and the gap is going to create the high points on the vermiculation.
Mhm.
So you have to, I have to visualize, okay, do I want a wider space, or do I want a wider gaps between them? So you have to be thinking way ahead of yourself to get it right. Then the
Mhm.
one on the right is actually created those little crescent shapes on the breast. So that was actually using the same combing technique, but there's a little pin in the corner there, which acted like a little anchor point, like a compass there, so you can turn it and make perfect little circles.
Mhm.
So anyway, that was just it's something that I wouldn't use those combs on anything else, but I made that specifically for that bird.
Mhm. It
There's a
goes to
lot.
the
There's a lot of things like you think, well, I'm gonna use this technique or something, or use this tool on this particular bird. You might not ever use it on another bird
Mhm.
because there's a specific thing that you want to create or want to achieve with it.
Mhm. I think we'll go now. If anyone has any questions, we have a couple as we're done here. There's I think this is the last slide we have it's from the book.
Yes,
Um,
that's from
um,
the 2018 World Shooting Rig,
mhm.
the best in the world that year. Um, was
We'll go to, I'm sorry.
go ahead. Go
We'll go
ahead.
to some of these questions, and then if anybody has any more, we'll get to as many as we can. This will want to hold this to about an hour or so. So these are some of the questions that's come in. First of all, there's no patterns in the book. Somebody asked that. So we did not include patterns in this book because it isn't really a how-to. Do you use wood hardener on fragile areas?
I guess in a sense I do. Like all my extremities, I'll soak with thin consistency cyanocrylate glue, CA glue.
CA glue. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thin consistency. It's almost like water.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll soak into those areas. So that serves the purpose of hardening the
It's just
surface.
hard.
I know there's some other types of wood hardeners as well, but that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can, like the bills, especially, your extremities are the areas that are most at risk of of getting damaged, like the ends of your bills, your tails, your wingtips. Those are all the areas I try to protect. And with the bills, you put that stuff on, then you can do fine sanding on it. It's just like bone when you're finished with it. It's real hard and it sands real nice.
Um, do you have a ceiling on composing the carving where you could be kind of composing too much during the planning stage?
Well, the one thing, like, if you're talking about my modeling, I don't work a lot of detail into my models. I want to
Mhm.
get the general shapes in there. If I've got the head turned a certain way, I want to get that done right. If there's an area that I know is going to be particularly challenging, I'll sometimes work a little bit more in the clay in that area so that I can resolve any issues or doubts that I have about certain things or arrangement of feathers. Um, but if you've got an idea or concept about a certain thing, you kind of got to just get at it and you know do that animation, whatever you have to do. But the detail is not critical. The detail is going to
Mhm.
come in the wood, and that's a lot of, you might say, technical things you're doing to achieve the detail. Um, not You might say it's not really the sculptural things. Sculptural things you work out in the clay. You
Mhm.
have to do it in the wood, but the finer detail certainly in the wood for sure.
How do you texture the filler around the neck, say when you add the head, so it blends with the wood burning?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's been has
There's a
been
whole
this
workshop, I think.
that's been a challenge for every carver, probably going back, unless you're like the Cajuns and carve out a single block of wood. Um, but then you need a piece of wood that's a lot bigger too.
Mhm.
But uh, there's a couple things you can do. Now, a lot of times you'll get a bird that has a very distinct color change in the color scheme between the neck and the body. And if you can strategically put that seam right along that color change, it makes it easier to disguise it, because your eye
Mhm.
sees that change in not only in the color, but also there's usually a textural change there too. So sometimes in the, you might say, the design of the bird, you can help yourself a little bit with that. Now,
Mhm.
in those seams, I'll usually cut a little channel through that area where the glue is, and then I'll use a wood filler. And um, there's most of those, pretty much all those wood fillers, they won't burn. So you have to resort to using a stone texture on that. So I'll use a real fine stone if I'm trying to match a real fine texture on either side of it. Also, if you extend that same texture into the wood on both sides of it, you're kind of blending it in, because you don't see a distinct change. So there's little tricks you can use to help yourself out. And then I'll certainly also, if there's any detail through that zone, I'll spend a lot of extra time just working the detail. That's the other thing that's kind of a little, I guess, a little tangent. And I spend you get more value for the time you spend if you spend it in transitional areas, as opposed to a big area that's all the same color scheme.
Mhm.
The transitions are areas that draw your eye. So if you spend your time there to get those areas really, really nice, you're probably getting the greatest benefit for the time you're spending. So I always talk about transitions when I'm teaching my students. Work on these transitions and get them nice, and you're going to get the best value for the time you're spending.
Mhm. Someone had a question about your workshops. How skilled do you have to be to join one of your workshops or attend one of your workshops?
Oh, I'll tell you what, I've had everything, from rank novices to, quite experienced carvers. And,
Hmm.
the experienced carvers are going to get another, might say another level of knowledge out of it. The more novice carvers are probably going to, they're going to learn a tremendous amount. They might not get some of the knowledge that is maybe at a little higher level,
Hmm.
but I I know when I'm teaching these seminars, if I've got students that don't have a lot of experience, I'm trying to instruct them at that level as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Where can you purchase dogwood?
Oh, that's I had it years and years ago. There was a source down in I think it might have been South Carolina, and at one point I had some blocks of it, and I was kind of running low, and I I I tried to contact them, and they indicated that they were totally out of carrying any wood products. So that source was gone. um, it's I had a specialty wood store near me, not too far away, and for a while they had some dogwood.
Hmm.
I don't think it's the kind of thing that has a lot of great commercial value, so I
Yeah,
don't really cut the large quantities of it.
you'd have to do a
Um,
lot of online research maybe to find someone
yeah,
who
and
carries it.
I don't know what I know here in Ontario. If you knew it, I know where there's some dogwood trees growing, but I think you get in big trouble if you went down there to cut a dogwood tree
We
down.
won't show a map.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like in other places.
Yeah,
It might be a normal thing if you own land and you had a dogwood tree on it
yeah.
and you cut it down, nobody would know anyway. But it doesn't grow big. They're small trees, so you're not
Hmm.
going to get a big huge piece. And the pieces that I normally have would probably be maybe 2 inches square and maybe 15, 20 inches long. So you're not probably going to get too much bigger than that, even
Yeah.
if you when you can find it.
The last question we have here for you is the listener says there are several types of Sculpey, firm, medium. What do you prefer?
Well, the
Um,
original Sculpey, the white Sculpey,
mhm.
they have like Super Sculpey, which is some of them have some grades that are harder, more firm. And if you're doing modeling something small, I have used the other types of Sculpey as well. Um, it's sometimes it's a little harder to work because it's a little too firm. I like to be able to have it. The interesting thing about Sculpey, you heat it up and it hardens it, but if you warm it, like I'll put a hair dryer on it sometimes and it softens it so
Mhm.
it's more pliable, and then I can really work it on the surface and move it around. There's no need to have a real hard, firm clay because if you were doing more detail into the clay, then yeah, certainly you would want a firmer clay. But I'm just trying to get shape. So
Mhm.
the and I'll build my models in sections. Like I'll do the head separate. I mean, if I got a wing exposed, I'll build the wing onto a aluminum armature underneath. I'll build the clay onto it, and then I'll add that to the body, and then I start building around it. I'll take a wooden. There's a wooden core in the middle. I'll take a wire, anchor it into the wooden core, and then the head's got a wooden core, and I can I'll hot melt glue those together, and then everything's firm, and I can take and twist the head around, and then fill in that area on the neck. A lot of that stuff I learned from kind of taxidermy, because the taxidermists still use wires and stuff to support things,
Mhm.
and they need to have like a firm body inside to anchor things to. So it's similar thing with the clay. you're building onto what they refer to as the armature, which is the underneath structure that holds the clay.
Well, I think that's the end of our presentation here. I'll remind everyone again about the book club, where you can get a discount on Pat's book. I certainly want to thank Pat Godden for joining us. I know there were tons of questions that people could ask. Hopefully they'll be answered by the book if they buy it. But it's been a pleasure. It's a pleasure working on the book. We're so happy to have published it. And so happy you could join us and are willing to share your knowledge. And thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody listening, and I really hope you enjoy the book.
Yeah, yeah.
And you'll be able to sit down in the evening and don't just look at the pictures. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of inspiring stuff in the words.
There's a lot of stuff in there. Well, thanks again, Pat. We certainly appreciate it, and we appreciate everyone who's joined us today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.